There we go. Okay. Looks like we're live again. All right. Well, welcome back to our Bulletin and Parsha discussion sections of our Shabbat service. Thank you for checking in with us and see how we're doing. All right. I need to reset my screens. All right. Shalom, Jonathan. Good to see you. Let's see. What else do I have to get up here? Monsieur Bulletin. Here we are. Okay. We're going to sit for a few minutes and just relax for a little bit, give people a chance to get back in. Hopefully things are working okay. We're not having a big delay this time. So Jonathan, you do your services over there, and then you come running over here. It's okay. Spend the whole day. Why is this? Oh, it's not upside down. Just this phone is okay, but it's kind of funny in that the touch screen, it's extremely sensitive, especially around the edges. And so if I pick up the phone or hold the phone, sometimes if my finger wraps around a little bit too far, it'll take that as an entry on the screen. So it's annoying. Okay, let me see. Shalom Yafa. Okay, well, enjoy your company. You know President Trump, Jonathan? Does he call you on a regular basis and ask you for your advice? Yeah. Yeah, resuming in person will be great. There's a lot of pressure now on the state to open up congregations for meeting, and so God willing, we're going to get that in the next week or so at the latest. I'm hoping before this next Shabbat, sometime before this next Shabbat, so we have time to try to organize our at least our Shavuot get together. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't piece together the parts of your statement. I thought you were saying that you know President Trump. That's really nice. Cool. Yeah, it'll be wonderful to see you in person, Jonathan. Okay. We're doing a delay, approximately. Nothing happening? Should be just fine. Everything looks like it's streaming just fine. About a minute? Wow, okay. Okay. So look, yeah, it looks a little bit choppy on the vid, but that's all right. It's not a big deal. Okay, well, it's better than what it has been, so. All right. All right, we have to put the mouse over here. Not doing so well. Okay, as long as it's coming through and it's not 20 minutes off or something, that's fine. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. The bulletin, I actually got it out earlier this week, so it should be posted Facebook or the website somewhere. And so we're just going to cover what's on the bulletin. Okay. Excuse me. Today is the 42nd of the Omer, which means next week, right about this time, will be our last counting of the Omer. And the next Saturday evening is going to be, of course, Shavuot. Okay, our readings for this week are posted here. Oh, I was in such a hurry, I forgot. Next week's study should be Galatians 2, not 1e. Oh well, so much for me being on the ball for anything. Okay, next week's reading is Naso, which means to elevate, or is translated officially as elevate. And as Barbara pointed out, this evening, sundown, is going to be the new moon, Sivan. And so go and check and double check and make sure that the new moon is tonight. Blow your shofar, have a celebration. Okay. And then we're still hoping that by this coming week we can meet at the shul for Shavuot evening. This is a day of no regular work, and during the week I'll be posting a study on Shavuot, so that if we can't make it together, you can at least read through on what's going on for Shavuot evening, and then and we're going to, I think we're going to be a little sneaky and sly on this. Is Sunday at noon at the park. We started this a couple years back and we've really liked it. Having a day at the park, because otherwise we have to wait till somewhere around 1 o'clock or so on Sundays for the church to clear out and make room for us so we can do our Shavuot day service, or we hang out at the park, barbecue. Yes, barbecue. Please, barbecue. And so it's the Cameron Park right there at just right down the street from the shul, and we may not be able to formally gather as a congregation as in reserve a kiosk or something for ourselves. Okay. So so I'm recommending that we just sort of show up, and if it's if we can just have an impromptu gathering, hopefully we won't get busted too hard. If not, we'll all end up at Gail's house or something. Anyways, so assuming anything else, worst case scenario, that'll be on the 31st on Sunday. Next month, you can see the only thing on the schedule for next month is June 22nd, the next new moon. And then when we get into July, there's a number of there's a couple of traditional things, the Fast of Tammuz and the Tish B'Av, the 9th of Av. But those are traditional. We'll talk about those when we get up to that time, and we'll take a look at very least I'll post something which explains the Fast of Tammuz and Tish B'Av. Okay. What time as far as meeting at the park? Well, we can't schedule anything officially, but if we all showed up at noon, it's a good time to have lunch. So, let's do it that way. Well, if you show up with a guitar or something, and
bring your own food.
Yeah. Yes. By the way, it's probably a good year to bring your own food. I know normally we like to bring for a crowd, and we do our normal shared nosh, but it probably would be good this year just to bring our own for ourselves. So you can, you're free to barbecue and bring a barbecue, a grill to do some barbecue, but I think it would probably be wiser for us this year to not share our food. And just in case somebody is concerned, be prepared to wear a mask even though we're outside. So just in case. All right. Okay. Any questions, comments, rebukes as far as the bulletin is concerned? Of course, there's still a 30-second, 1-minute delay. So, anything else to add or anything else to mention? Okay. So in radio, you're never supposed to leave a mic dead for 5 seconds. So I'm violating the rules by not talking constantly. Okay. I'm going to leave the chat up so I can read it. But excuse me. We can always come back and talk if we have a question about something. Ah, there we are. I knew there was a right way to do this. Okay, Parshat Bamidbar. This is the complete Jewish Bible translation, and so this doesn't have some of the translation issues that a lot of English translations do, because although I would still have one thing to finalize, or to a slight difference in consideration. Bamidbar, the English name is Numbers, and of course that's pretty obvious because the whole section starts off with a whole big list of names and numbers of people. But the Bamidbar is here it's translated in the desert, which is accurate enough, but I would suggest perhaps a better understanding would be in the wilderness. It's not that the place was dusty, dry, no water, no plants, no nothing, which we would think of as a desert. Rather, we think more in the way of wilderness, as in a place that did have water, a place that did have foliage around, but it was uninhabited, which is what you'd call wild, wildness, wilderness. So just my consideration for that. Okay. Okay, we start off with a large section on counting people. All right. And the first thing we want to talk about then is there are 12 tribes and 14 tribe names. Okay. So whenever there's a listing of the tribes, you have an opportunity for some confusion, because most of the time when the 12 tribes are named, somebody gets dropped out. Now, in our reading this week, it was pretty easy in that Joseph was mentioned, but then he names the two sons separately, even though they are classified as tribes in their own sense by now. Nonetheless, they were considered, they're all part of Joseph. So here you had Joseph named, but then you also had Manasseh and Ephraim listed separately, which keeps you what puts you up to 13 names. And then when it comes to the counting, God said, don't count Levi. Don't count Levi. And so they weren't counted in the main group. However, God came back and said, go ahead and count the Levi'im, because they had work to do. And even though they are not going to go to war, which is, the age for counting the men in Israel was those who were capable of going to war. Levi was not to be sent to war. They were to stay and take care of the tabernacle, even though all the other guys would be out to war if they ever sent absolutely everybody. I think that if you look at the text, it was fairly rare where all of Israel went to war. So many times it was just a couple of tribes that were sent. For the most part, I think that's how it reads out for the most part. But it's kind of not so often that absolutely everybody went to war. Okay. See, I think that kind of takes care of a lot of this first section, chapter 1. Chapter 2. This was kind of interesting. You had in chapter 2, there was a relisting of the tribes, but also the place where they're going to camp around the tabernacle. And you end up with sort of a square-ish looking camp, generally speaking, with tribes to the east, tribes to the south, tribes to the west, and tribes to the north. And then Levi would camp immediately around the tabernacle. Okay. So you have that. Some of this is a repeat of the last chapter. Well, in the sense, yeah, it's deeper than just counting them. There's more than one reason to have a count, and one of those ways is you're going to have a count like this right now when the wanderings officially start. Okay, they're still at Mount Sinai right now. Before they're which should be an 11-day journey. It turns out to 40 years. It sounds like a plot for a TV show. Okay, instead of a 3-hour tour, not it was 5 seasons or whatever it was. So you have what should have been an 11-day journey is now 40 years of wandering. But you had a total number, and you have a total number when the wanderings are over and it's time to go in the land. There was a recount, and the numbers were about the same. Now, considering that the entire population of Israel from 20 years and above got replaced during those 40 years, it would be somewhat understandable, rather understandable, that the population number is flat, because that's you're basically you're losing about a third of the total population of the people because of the plagues that occurred because of the disobedience of the people. So to have a relatively equal number at the beginning as at the end is actually good, because it shows that the nation had replenished itself and didn't decline. Okay, even though they lost 2/3 of the population, they managed to keep their growth, to where the total is pretty much the same. So that's one reason for counting before and counting after. Other people might have other. I'm sorry. I have to tilt this back a little bit. It's hard for me to read this small print. Okay. The people were designated by name, so I think it went deeper than just counting them. Yafa also added designated leaders in finding out their strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. Strengths and weaknesses, obviously, because of the leaders of the tribes that God designates, there's only 2 that made it all the way through the 40 years. Yehoshua and Caleb. So so some were good, some weren't so good. Okay. So let's move on with this. We have the counting. That's into that chapter. Okay. Then you have in chapter 3 you have directions and instruction to Levi as well as the sons of Aharon. Levi, as is stated, is given to Aharon basically to do the physical labor of the tabernacle. Levi, because their occupation is serving God, they're not supposed to be out doing agribusiness. When they get to the land, they'll be permitted to plant and harvest and grow their own food on a subsistent basis in the fields around the towns of the Levites, but they're not going to be doing agribusiness, and they're not called to war. That's their sole job is to serve the tabernacle. The priestly family within this division of labor is when it's time to pick up and move the tabernacle, Itamar or Aaron, Aharon, they're to wrap up the holy items to where they can't be seen, and to stick the poles in place so that the Levites can come and transport. I come to think of it, because I think it was one of the families of the Levites. Their job was transportation, to carry everything. Okay, so and that's what they're. So you have a division of labor here, and God was very specific and careful that actually it was Aaron and his sons would be the only one allowed to look at the holy the items in the holy place in order to pack them up and make them ready for shipping. Even the brazen altar was covered up. So it kind of makes you wonder, when it comes to the setup of the tabernacle, what was really visible, and how far did just anybody be allowed to walk in and present their gifts and their offerings and their sacrifices? Apparently, they weren't allowed to wander around inside at all. So you're thinking 10 kilometers from... That would be a long ways to walk from to the tabernacle if you're going to bring something for a sacrifice. Oh well. To me, that seems a bit far, but I have no information to disagree, so I'm going to leave it unchallenged. Okay. So that's basically a lot of the discussion. Now, it's kind of interesting. Remember what Hosea was saying, and I want to point it out here as just a little look ahead, that God said that He's going to take even the Gentiles, the people of the nations. He's going to take some of them and make them priests and Levites. And that's a level of inclusion that is sadly lacking in a lot of Messianic circles, where, sad to say, there's still a certain amount of racism there. And we really don't allow for that in our congregation. But there are some congregations and even some organizations of whom some congregations belong, which still purport that Gentiles are a separate class of people and not fully included, or they have a second-class citizenship in some function or another. And so it's one of the reasons that we as a congregation have never really affiliated with anybody since, I don't know, close to 20 years ago now we've been together. And I think it's only about 2 years, maybe 3 years into us being a congregation, we had finally decided that's it, we can't belong to these two organizations we were. And, in all these years since then, they have never changed their position, even though I usually don't miss an opportunity to remind anybody who belongs to that organization why we aren't part of it. Nonetheless, they're not willing to change. When we get into Hosea, it'll be there. What verse says it? So I'm mentioning it ahead of time, just because we have a very stringent rule here by God, a very stringent commandment that nobody but Aaron and his sons can enter the holy place, and nobody but Levi can get into the tabernacle of meeting. So the fact that somebody who is of the nations is going to be elevated to that position in Messiah, once Messiah comes, or now that Messiah has come, is a very interesting concept. And just in case there's somebody who's listening to this who is of the opinion that Jews are Jews and Gentiles need not apply, I would challenge that point of view. And we're going to get to that in Hosea, which is going to speak to that most directly. Okay. You have a division of labor within the tribes of Levi, and Kahat gets the job of transportation of all the holy items. I used to work for a guy way back in the 80s, a Jewish father and son doing a produce business, and I would drive for them, drive a truck. And they had mentioned they had told me, because when we're always trying to live an example, is they had mentioned to me that they can trace their lineage back to the family of Kohath in English. Okay, the family of Kohath. So I thought that was really cool. So they get to be the ones schlepping. I guess considering their business is as a purveyor was to buy produce out of the central market in LA and then deliver it out to schools and restaurants and stuff like that. So they were still in the job of transportation. I guess it works. Anyways. We have a restatement of the Levi'im being a replacement for the firstborn as to being God's priests. And remember, that was because the children of Levi at the incident of the golden calf stood with Moshe and did the difficult thing of killing their brothers who were worshiping at the golden calf. So there was a redemption for this. By the way, is where you get the tradition of redeeming with silver coins, five coins for the firstborn child in a Jewish family, a traditional Jewish family. It's probably one of the things we need to look up to get for the congregation is that traditional. It's a bag with 5 silver coins in it, 5 shekels in it, and it's used when it's given by the father. The priest receives it and waves it over the head of the child and recites a blessing that this counts for the redemption of the firstborn. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Okay, I kind of got ahead of myself there with discussing the family of Kohath and all their work, but that's okay. That's here in chapter 4. And any questions, comments, or rebukes with regards to anything in Bamidbar? If you have a question, we can easily come back to this, so not to worry. Let's see, George, good to have you on. Also, the whole family. I'm sure everybody's huddled around a phone or a computer and listening in. Yeah, Isaiah 66 also talks about priests and Levites. Yeah. Is that the one about Gentiles even becoming priests and Levites, or just that the priests and the Levites are mentioned there? It's all right. Okay, let's move on. Hosea. Again, I mentioned in the English Bible, the numbering system in the English Bible, our portion starts on chapter 1, verse 10, but in the Hebrew Bible, it starts at chapter 2. The text is the same, it's the numbering system that's different, so don't freak out too much. This is why the complete Jewish Bible, whenever there's a discrepancy, you'll notice that in the headings, the chapter heading is chapter 2, and then it gives the English. But in the other way around, or in this case, you see how the number difference is. You have 10 and 11 in chapter 1, and then you have in the parentheses, then you still have the English number as different from the Jewish number, and that's okay. Okay, cool. Sorry, I'm blanking on Isaiah 66 right now, so I thought I'd ask. Okay. So, Hosea. Hosea was a prophet to whom and when? Okay. If you remember your mnemonics, hard for me to say. the way to memorize and to learn things. There were two prophets that were primarily focused in the northern kingdom. Okay, this is during the political separation between the northern tribes, the 10 northern tribes, and the 2 southern tribes. The northern tribes were generally called Israel. The southern tribes were generally called Judah. Now, it doesn't always work completely consistently. Sometimes the southern tribes are listed as Israel as well. And the names that God uses for both are a little bit flexible sometimes. When it's talking about Israel, you kind of have to think about the speaker and the audience. And in this case, it's really clear in the text that this is a prophecy towards the northern tribes during the time of the separated kingdoms. Okay, so even though God's going to judge the people, in the end, Israel will be numbered as much as the grains of the sands by the sea, which can't be measured or counted. Okay, so why is this? Well, Hosea, if you remember, his basic theme, the first 3 chapters, he talks about his relationship with Gomer, the woman he was ordered to marry, who was a prostitute. And it was to make a picture of God's relationship with Israel, Israel's relationship with God, that Israel was always playing the harlot in the sense of chasing after other gods and loving those other gods more than loving those fake gods, I should say, more than loving the real true God. And when we get through the text a little more carefully, you're going to run into a little bit of translation and context issues because some of the words being used are the same. And so we got to look at the context and straighten that out. Okay? Okay. Verse 2 in the CJB, or 1:11 in the English Bible. Then the people of Yehuda and the people of Israel will be gathered together. They will appoint for themselves one leader, and they will go up out of the land, for that will be a great day, the day of Israel. Israel. Okay, so this is a mini bit here. I forgot. The after chapter 3, Hosea starts doing a cyclical set of statements where there's 3 basic themes that he covers in a cyclical basis over and over and over again, and they basically follow the same theme of God's going to smack down Israel for all their sinfulness and chasing after the Baalim, but then God's going to say, so it pains him so much to wreck Israel completely that he doesn't want to do it completely wreck Israel, and that he's going to, the third part then is that he's going to restore Israel, and everyone's going to be filled with the Spirit of the living God and walk in his ways, and everything's going to be beautiful. In the next chapter, we have the same story. And in the next chapter, same story. Sometimes it's not exactly a whole chapter or more than one chapter, but you get this over and over and over again. Pretty much all the rest of Hosea is saying the same thing over and over again. Okay, so it's pretty cyclical at this point. Okay, now this is how, when we begin, this is how we end up. So say to your brothers, verse 3, Ami, my people, and to your sisters, Ruhamah, pitied, rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she isn't my wife, and I'm not her husband. So again, the physical relationship between Gomer and Hosea was that she ended up actually running off and resuming her profession. And she got busted down to the point where she was being sold at auction basically as a slave, probably on a low level. And God orders Hosea to go and buy her contract, so that she has no legal right to go anywhere else. And this again is part of the spiritual picture of the northern tribes of Israel. Not that the southern tribes were wonderful, but they weren't as bad as the northern tribes. Okay, so here we have a statement of the beginnings of these cycles. She isn't my wife, and I'm not her husband, because she's chasing after other gods, and God usually uses adultery as a picture of chasing after false gods and not staying with the one true God. And yes, which makes it really even more interesting, is the words in the text here have a lot of similarities. A lot of times, God or Lord or even Master is the same word in Hebrew that uses for God and also uses for the false gods. For instance, husband. Okay, the word husband in the Hebrew is Baal. Okay, it's a generic word meaning husband, but it's also used for the false gods. You'll notice throughout the Bible you have the Baalim, the false gods. That's in the plural, and they are. It's the same root word as that God uses, that He is the husband for Israel, Baal. Okay, and we get into the next chapter, we're going to see that a little bit. Okay, but understand, just because it's the same word doesn't mean it's the same thing. Okay, it would be a little bit off if your wife starts calling somebody else her husband, but it would be technically proper if she was to use the word Baal to talk about her boss at work or something like that. Okay, so just understand, context drives the meaning, and so context. Okay, I won't get into all the lurid details of what's going on. Verse 6. I'm going to use the Hebrew numbering just because it's out here in the open, easy for me to see. I will have no pity on her children. Again, and this is one of the harsh statements in verse 5. She says, I will pursue my lovers who gave me my food and water, wool, flax, olive oil, and wine. The lovers here are not too harsh, not too hard to follow reference to the false gods that she has pursuing, the northern tribes. Okay, the northern tribes went after everything that wasn't the true God and worshipped it. And we're going to get into, in fact, next week. It's about the time that a lot of pagans have fertility festivals, so they can implore their little non-gods to produce for them a good harvest. The difficulty at this time, this particular time, all the time that the northern tribes were a separate kingdom, you actually had good rains, good production of crops, and the nation prospered. The 10 northern tribes prospered, well, all of Israel, both sets, prospered during this time. And so they were inclined to chase after the wrong thing. That's sort of a natural thing. And this is where I want to take a little bit of a step aside and talk a little bit about pursuing our lovers. That's a spiritual thing, when we're talking about false gods. Because we think they're the ones that provide for us our food and our water, our wool, flax, olive oil, and wine. Basically all the stuff. This is true even to today. And you'll find even believers who are not clearly and wholeheartedly focused on walking in God's ways, they will pursue other things as if they're that is the source of what they want, all the stuff they want. And And it comes from everything from, their own bodies, how they dress, how they, they're exercising a lot just so they make their bodies, a picture like a Greek statue, or, they're dressed in a way that's provocative to show off what they've got. So, their own body is their own God in that sense. You can pursue financial gurus whom you will treat as a god because whatever they say you'll do. Even if it's not Torah. Especially when God says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, but your guru is telling you work 7 days a week. You're going to do the same thing that God is complaining about here. So be careful. When you're pursuing something, where you're doing something, where are you getting your impetus, your drive, your focus, your direction, your instruction about how to do things? You don't want to find yourself not being congratulated when you stand before the great God and he says, so what'd you do with yourself? That's not a good thing. Okay? So what God does is he basically takes away from the northern tribes, historically speaking, he's going to make thorns and hedges so Israel can't go back to those false gods. And he does that through 3 different incidences of Assyria coming down, attacking the northern kingdom, and carrying the people away, and dispersing them from the gods of the local gods away, so that they cannot go back to those ways, but rather they are pretty much made to go after the gods of the Assyrians. So you're basically taking away false gods and forcing you to appeal to false gods. So you're going from bad to very worse. Okay, until you get to the point where they say, "I'm going to go back to my first husband." In other words, to the true God. So things were better for me then than they are now, and God will do this with us. If you notice, you might be going through a dry period. Things don't seem to be going well. Things seem to be just a big struggle, big headache, big hassle. It's probably because God wants you to make a direction change. It's not just because he's pounding on you. It's more like he's trying to nudge you over into the direction where he really wants you going. In my life, I've discovered that when I run into those times where I just can't seem to do anything right, no matter what I do, people are upset at me, it's probably time that I need to reconsider changing something. And sure enough, there's an opportunity to change something that I wouldn't have been open to had everything been going hunky-dory. Okay. Verse 10, for she doesn't know that it was I who gave her the grain, the wine, the oil, I who increased her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Okay. Now remember, the word Baal is generic, and in this context, it's the false gods. Okay, context drives that very easily. You can figure that one out. So all the stuff that we get that God provides for us, and then we attribute that to something else. And receiving that comes from something else, and this is where we step into the realm of worshiping false gods. Because if we attribute incorrectly, how we receive the things we get, and we don't point out that it was, the true God, Hashem, who gives us life, gives us health, gives us the wisdom and capability and knowledge to earn and to do things, and that he works with us to help us prosper. If we forget that and attribute it to other things, then we're in danger of doing exactly this thing, to attribute to whatever is a non-God as the source of our prosperity. Okay. God then says he's going to take back his grain. it kind of gives me the picture, you take back something. It's kind of like you gave it, then you take it back, or you lay it out and then you take it back before someone can get to it. And if you think about it, that's how plagues and infestations happen. If you get severely bad hail just before a harvest, you're going to destroy. It's going to destroy crops. Or if God sends bugs, at your standing grain or your produce, locusts and stuff, and they'll eat up everything, and then you're end up with almost nothing as a result. It's kind of like you're there, you're waiting for it, it's about time to be harvested, and suddenly something comes and takes it all away from you. Okay. Just a little, one more, I never should say one more. Verse 12, now I want to cover her shame while her lovers watch, and no one will save her from me. Okay. Just remember, who is the all-powerful one? Who is the one in control? Okay. Even if we misuse our time and our affections and our giving to support things that aren't truly God, and to chase after things that aren't truly God, they're not going to help you. They're not going to be around to save you when God rebukes your livelihood or your prosperity, because you're using it for the wrong things. Okay, verse 13. This is absolutely critical. Okay. Because somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about is going to say the wrong thing. Okay, I will end her happiness, her festivals, Rosh Chodesh, and Sabbaths, Shabbats, and all her designated times. Okay, now, just because those are the same words that's used in the Bible, where God says that we're going to have feast days, new moons, weekly Sabbaths, and all the designated times like in Leviticus 23, that's not talking about the same ones. Okay? Notice it's her happiness and her festivals. Not his, hers. Very important. Very important to know that difference, because you're going to run into somebody inevitably who's going to say, well, you see, God doesn't like those Sabbaths and those new moons and all those other things that he said to do in the Bible. It says, no, that's not it. These are the pagan ones. Okay? Using Gomer, or the northern tribes of Israel, as the picture of that that wife who doesn't stay true to her husband. That's the her in this verse. Okay, not for the people of God, and not for God Himself and His stuff, or us for following His stuff. This is the other stuff, but they use the same names. And so we have to be careful that we don't assume and accept that it's the same thing, even though it sounds like the same. Context drives the definition. Okay. Okay. Excuse me while I read this, Jonathan. He always wants us to repent and stay focused on Him, put down the false gods that we have such a love for, sports or food or money or power or fame, etc., etc., etc. I added that in. And not Hashem. Yeah, pagan rituals of men. Yes, exactly. God wants us to stay true to His ways. And we have to be careful, when it comes to rituals and traditions. Some traditions are not based in God's commandments. Some are somewhat, some are not. And so we have to be wise about how we employ tradition. This is why when we run into tradition, we are a fairly traditional congregation. But when we look at tradition, we judge and we decide, is this helpful? Is this useful? Does it help us walk with God? What does it take us away from walking with God? Are we doing something with the tradition that is against what God wants to do? And for those traditions, that don't fulfill that task of helping us walk with God, we let those go. We are more cautious to be away from those things than to do them. But some things can be helpful, and some things are somewhat neutral, but it helps us identify as who we are. And so, yeah, we will embrace tradition, but we're also cognizant and knowledgeable and considered about which traditions we follow and the ones that we do, how. Okay. Okay, get down to verse 16. Now God's back to that, I can't bear to get rid of you altogether. And I'm going to promise to do good things. I'm going to woo you, bring you out to the desert, speak to your heart, give you vineyards in the Achor Valley. I don't know my Israel well enough to know where that is. And we get into a very interesting prophecy. And this is where we also get some more language, a little more bit more good stuff. On that day, says Adonai, it's probably Yud He Vav He or something like that. You will call me Ishi, which means my husband. You will no longer call me Ba'ali, my master. Now here God makes a differentiation. Ish is Hebrew for man. And so within Hebrew, it's permissible to call your husband Ishi, for the woman to call her husband Ishi, but it's also permissible for her to call him Ba'ali. And you'll find that word Baal is used for God when you're talking about Israel being the husband of Israel. Okay? In this case, it's a play on words because he's talking about you should not be following the Ba'alim. And so here he uses a different word for himself, Ishi, for husband. And this context in this phrase specifies Ba'ali as being the false gods. Okay? And one of the things that you'll know that you've accomplished this is that you will no longer use the names of the false gods and to speak the names of the false gods and never again mention them by name. Okay? That's one of the keys. That's one of the clues whether or not you really have your heart and your mind changed to walk in God's ways, to where you're not quoting or thinking about or citing or pointing to the false gods. And I have to mention as a sideline on this, we have to be careful because sometimes we can be so spiritually minded, so heavenly minded, we're of no earthly use. We are surrounded in this area of California with all kinds of pagan god names. Half of our cities are named after pagan gods. Tons of streets are named after pagan gods. And you end up in a spot where you cannot communicate with the world if you don't name them. The good thing is most people don't know that they're naming the name of a false god. And so there's a disconnect with the false gods and the name being used. But it's one of those uncomfortable, horrible things we have to endure because, as Shaul recommended, we're not of this world, but we're in it. And so we're stuck doing things that are uncomfortable and not good just so we can make ourselves known in the world. And so we do our best to be holy, but I really haven't run into anybody who got really, 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 really good at never mentioning a false god's names, since we're surrounded by so many of them in the names of streets and cities and even states. Okay? I'd like to challenge anybody to never name the name of a false god and still tell somebody what state you live in here. So, it's one of those things. It's an unavoidable pain that we get to enjoy. Not name it, but for everything else that we can't avoid, we need to make it a point to not name the names of the pagan gods. Okay. And again, a promise of the redeemed future of the northern tribes. When that day comes, I will make a covenant for them with the wild animals and the birds of the air and the creeping things of the earth. I will break bow and sword, sweep battle from the land, and make them lie down securely. All right. Then the last two verses in our segment here, very important. This is the blessing that the husband uses when he puts the ring on the bride. I'll betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness, in justice, in grace, and in compassion. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you will know Adonai. Okay. It's also the same phrase used when you're laying tefillin, when you're putting on the straps of your prayer, your phylacteries. You have two tefillin. One goes on your head, it's called shel rosh, and one goes around your arm, called shel yad, for the hand. And there's a traditional process you use to put them on. And when you are done tying the strap on your arm, you wind the remainder of the strap around the fingers and your hand in a particular way. And as you're doing that, you are reciting these two verses here. It's kind of as if in part of your morning get-going routine, you're kind of making a statement of engagement and marriage to Hashem all over again every morning. It's one of the really beautiful things in the tradition. Now, if you're doing this and thinking somehow this gives you good luck and good fortune, that's the wrong way of doing it. But if you're doing it so you get this feeling of re-entering a loving relationship with the God of all creation through this process, it's a wonderful thing to do. Okay. Any questions, comments, rebukes on our haftarah? Okay, if there are, we can come back and pick it up. Okay, our last bit is over in. Oh, that's right, I pushed the wrong thing there. Okay, starting in verse 22 of Romans 9, and here, Rabbi Shaul is speaking to a mixed congregation. This was historically the Roman congregation was a mixed congregation, but Jew and Gentile, I mean mixed. But Nero got mad at the Jewish people, and he commanded that all Jews leave Rome for the course of a year. 1 year, 2 year, I can't remember. I wasn't there. So all the Jews left, and the Gentiles who were left in the congregation kind of got used to doing things their way. And when the Jews were finally allowed to come back in, the Jews who were part of the congregation wanted to come back in and take over again as if nothing had changed. And the Gentiles who were used to running things by then objected to that. So there was conflict between Jews and Gentiles in the Roman congregation. This is the historical setting. This is why Shaul in Romans spends so much time talking about Jews and Gentiles. Israel and Gentiles, where he usually often uses the phrase. And he goes to great heavy extent to press the idea that Jews and Gentiles are one in Messiah. There is no difference. In fact, the identity of a Gentile in the Messianic community is one of being part of Israel. Okay, and we get to Romans 11. That's where this is why it's in the prayer service. We recite it every week. That Gentiles are grafted into and among the native branches of Israel, meaning that we all become one tree, one olive tree. In the case of that picture. Okay, so we no longer have Jew and Gentile. We have altogether one. Okay, and so part of the crazy doctrines that separate Jew and Gentile, the two-house theory and that kind of stuff, two-house doctrine, it doesn't work. God says these two are one, and the doctrine says, oh, no, Jews and Gentiles have to be separate. even though they say they're supposed to be one, 2 seconds later they're talking about why they're different. And so, you can't have one and the same and separate at the same time. When it comes to what God has called us to be, God has called us to be one people, okay? And not as a separate identity, but as part of Israel. If you're a Gentile, you are part of Israel. That's your identity. Now, the obvious question that follows that is, does that make you Jewish? No. It doesn't change your ethnicity, but it does change your affinity. It changes your citizenship. Okay. Ephesians talks about being one in one proletariat. That's sort of what is the word that comes out. One population. Okay. Many different tribes and tongues and peoples, but one population. It's kind of like moving to this country from outside the country. You're born and raised outside the country, but you move here, you become a naturalized citizen. Now you're an American. It doesn't change your ethnic identity, but you are now an American. Okay? In the same way that works with Israel. We are now Israel. It doesn't change our ethnicity, but we are now Israel. And since we're all one and the same as Israel, we have no reason to be different. Okay, we have no reason to separate ourselves and to make ourselves distinct. Especially, it usually works out in a fairly abusive fashion, a rather degrading fashion for people who push that stuff. Okay. So Shaul quotes what we read from in Hosea, and then in Yeshayahu he adds, if Adonai Tzavot had not left us a seed, we would have become like stone, we would have resembled Amorah. Yeah, Jonathan, a separatist doctrine since Constantine. Well, I would suggest even before then, but it was sort of finalized and codified under Constantine. Okay. I think I missed something in Hosea. I need to go back to it. But okay. Verse 30 here in Romans. So what are we trying to say here? This, that Gentiles, even though they were not striving for righteousness, have obtained righteousness, but it is a righteousness grounded in trusting. In other words, we trust. We trust that what Messiah has done for us counts for us, and that is really the point of salvation for us. And we call upon God, like in Isaiah 53:10, and we tell God we want Messiah's sacrifice to count for us. God will make it count for us. Okay, that's trusting. What have we done to earn that? What have we done to make God save us? Nothing. Okay. Therefore, so on to verse 31. However, Israel, even though they kept pursuing a Torah that offers righteousness, did not reach what the Torah offers. Okay. Now here, this translation uses the word Torah instead of the word law. Okay. And again, this is with Paul. You have to ask yourself, which version of law are you talking about? There's at least 4 different ways he uses the word law. And the 2 main ones he talks about, one is law, meaning God's Torah, his written commandments. And the other law is the man-made rules of Pharisaism. Okay? And so what Paul is differentiating here is that Gentiles come to Messiah through Gentiles come to God by trusting in what Messiah has done for them. Israel missed the boat by trying to impose Pharisaism as the means for righteousness. And so what Paul is basically doing at this point, he is telling the Gentiles they are not second-class citizens, they are part of Israel. And oh, by the way, the Jews who practice Pharisaism are in danger of replacing Torah with man-made instruction. And so this goes on in Messianic congregations all the time. So be careful. Okay, why? Because they did not pursue righteousness, being grounded in trusting, but as it were, even were grounded in doing legalistic works. They stumbled over the stone that makes people stumble. As Tanakh puts it, look, I am laying in Zion a stone that will make people stumble, a rock that will trip them up. But he who rests his trust on it will not be humiliated. Very nice. There's one thing I had mentioned earlier on, and somebody asked me where that was, and I said it was in Hosea, and then now I realize that I missed where I said that. Okay, the end of our Parsha, let's see, verse 25. I will sow her for me in the land. I will have pity on lo ruhama. Okay, unpitied. This is earlier in the chapter. He said that the people are going to be called ruhama or pitied. Now they're going to be called lo ruhama, not pitied. And I will say to lo ami, not my people. You are my people. Okay, here he didn't translate it. Ami. So lo ami is not my people. Ami is my people. Okay, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God. Okay, did I... Oh, you know what? I mistook something. I think it's back in our Torah reading. Is where it was. He goes to say he's even going to take of the Gentiles and make some of them priests and Levites. No, I remember because it's we have the same phrase before, but I remember it was kind of a interesting point in my mind because it was okay. I'm blanking. I'm trying to scroll through this really fast, and of course, it's not going to happen. Okay, sorry. I'm absolutely sure that I will be able to find this 2 minutes after we close for the day. So anyways, any other questions, comments, rebukes? Yeah, Tara pointed out Isaiah 66. I wonder if maybe I am... missing that. I thought for sure it was Torah portion. But it's all right. Tell you what, let's find it. Isaiah 66, 19. The time is coming when I will gather together all nations and languages. They will come and see my glory, and I will give them a sign. I will send some of their survivors to the nations of Tarshish, Pul, Lud. This is what I was reading. Tuval, Greece, and more distant coasts, where they have neither heard of my fame nor seen my glory. I will proclaim my glory in these nations, and they will bring all of your kinsmen out of all the nations as an offering to Adonai, on horses, on chariots, in wagons, on mules, on camels, on 4x4s. To my holy mountain, Jerusalem, says Adonai. Just as the people of Israel themselves bring their offerings in clean vessels to the house of Adonai. Yeah, here we are. I will also take Kohanim and Levites, Kohanim and Leviim, from them, says Adonai. So the context here is, bringing in the Gentiles from all over the world. And so verse 21, God says he will make of even the Gentiles Kohanim and Leviim, which is very, very interesting because you have very restrictive commandments as to the priests and to the Levites. You have to be born into it. So it's going to be very interesting. Thank you for reminding me of that, by the way. So that's very important. It's most interesting. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, one thing I have to say as a caution, notice who's doing the talking. He says, I will also take. That doesn't mean that if you're a Gentile and you really want to be, a priest or a Levite, you can't make yourself one. It's going to be God's calling. So, okay. That was it then. Any other questions, comments, rebukes? You could make the point that it's speaking of Jews who were sent out, and amongst the nations. The problem is they don't come back. They don't come back with a Gentile identity. Jews come home with the identity of being Jewish. Okay, no matter where they've lived, they have maintained their identity. That doesn't mean absolutely everybody does, but as a group of people, you find Jews from every nation in this world maintaining their Jewishness. Okay, the people that are not of Israel, that are not Jewish, let's say ethnically Jewish, let's put it that way. I believe this verse 21 speaks of them, because it doesn't make sense for God to take priests and Levites out of His own people. It doesn't make sense. It makes better sense to say that it's pointing to the Gentiles. Not something worth a really heavy argument, but nonetheless something to consider. Okay. See, but will the Levites and priests be from the Gentiles, or those they brought back to the land? Yeah, I see the point. But if they're coming back to the land, they're being brought back to the land by the Gentiles, they're still Jewish. They already have their Jewish identity. They already have their tribal identity, at least as far as priests and Levites, their family identity. It doesn't make sense. The phrase itself is too broad. So I will also take Kohanim and Leviim from them, says Adonai. That means he's not saying I will remind them who they are. He's not saying I'm going to take people that are already priests and Levites and resettle them. But so the them, I think, needs to be Gentiles. Again, I don't want to spend all day arguing on that point, because we will find out when it happens, so it's not something that we have to solve right this second. Okay. Yeah, Jonathan, just like the first century, they remained Jewish while following the way of Mashiach. Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments, rebukes? Nice thing to end up on a discussion. That's good. Well, I don't know if you want to say no longer a Gentile. You don't change your ethnicity, but you do change your family and cultural identity. You change your citizenship, but you don't really change your ethnicity. Okay, that's otherwise the terminology would all be different. You know, like in Romans 11, where the Gentile, the picture of the wild olive branch being grafted in among the native olive branches, you'd have entirely different terminology if that wild branch lost its identity and was, turned into a native branch. So you're no longer a clueless sinner. Let's put it that way. You come to learn God's ways. Okay. Any other questions, comments, rebukes? Okay. Everybody over here is napping already. I put them to sleep. Okay. I'm going to stay open a little bit longer to make sure that everybody, that this discussion ends without being chopped off. So I'm going to go silent for a little while, and then a minute or two, and we'll close up for the day. God bless you. Don't forget, there's I got to do my YouTube thing. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all that other good stuff. And we'll see you on Wednesday at 6 o'clock California time for Galatians chapter 2. Not what the bulletin says. You gotta never trust the guy who does the bulletin, okay? I was supposed to do chapter 2 for this week's study, and I missed it. Okay, so we'll see you Wednesday, God willing. How long are we strangers in the land? Well, it wouldn't take long at all, because Torah, what God says, is that when the stranger comes and wants to be part of Israel, they're to follow the commandments, and they will be regarded as native born. So the fact of the fact that you are not ethnically Jewish would basically fall away and become meaningless as you learn to walk with God and walk in God's ways. And to the sense, and I get the question that would follow, in the sense that over time you would lose that Gentile identity and be considered Jewish, in the sense that you're part of the people. But I just don't want, what I don't want is people running around saying I'm a Jew because I believe in Yeshua, and then living in a manner that is offensive to Torah. Okay, and as labeling people as Jews just because they embrace Yeshua doesn't make the divide between those who are walking with God and those who are not. So I'm very conscientious of that, because it's really hard to come back on a discussion when somebody says, oh yeah, I knew one of those guys who called himself Jewish, but he was eating a ham sandwich when he was telling me this. And unless your walk is up to being easily identified as belonging to God, I would be very cautious about labeling and being labeled as Jewish. But yeah, I can see that somewhere down the road, our individual ethnicity will fade, I think, over time. But I don't see a commandment that says it that way, except maybe when God says that a particular ethnical person won't be allowed into God's sanctuary for a generation or two or three, and some not even as far as 10. Okay. Yeah. Actually, it says that kingdom of priests. That's the text in Exodus 19. A kingdom of priests. Yeah. So in a way, yeah, things get a little bit blurred on occasion, but it's nonetheless gives us something to talk about. Okay. Shabbat Shalom. And so no longer a Gentile as to how we live, definitely. Okay. If you're ethnically Jewish, it's not bad to call yourself Jewish, but otherwise you might want to just call yourself Israel, as an Israelite. Okay. Shalom. God bless you guys. We'll see you Wednesday, God willing. All right. I'm going to start closing things down. That's right, George. All right, so I can close this and close that. Okay, it's done.